Welcome to Scarlet Tavern. Grab a drink, take a seat, and let's begin. Today we're diving into the chilling, bizarre story of Vickie Dawn Jackson. Picture this, a small-town nurse with a smile that could light up a room, but behind that friendly facade lurked a dark secret. Vickie Dawn Jackson's story is a twisted tale of trust, betrayal, and a series of mysterious hospital deaths that left everyone asking, what just happened? So grab your favorite snack, settle in, and let's unravel the eerie and perplexing case of Vickie Dawn Jackson. This is one story that proves truth can be stranger than fiction. This is Scarlet Tavern. Alright, so Vickie Dawn Jackson.
Killer Angel.
Yes. So, I'm just gonna jump right into it.
Yeah.
Alright. We will probably make jokes at Vickie Dawn Jackson's expense.
And the town of Nakona.
Yeah.
Too.
Just because how else will we get through talking about stuff so brutal? Okay, so Vickie Dawn Jackson moved to Nakona, Texas with her family from Indiana in the early 1980s when she was 15 years old. The relocation was motivated by the need for a drier climate for her younger brother who suffered from asthma. The family settled into a rundown frame house on Henrietta Street on the east side of town. Vickie's father worked as a shade tree mechanic, while her mother pulled double shifts as a cook at the Nakona nursing home. To help support her family, Vickie took a job at the nursing home, starting in the laundry room after school. During her junior year, she was promoted to nurse's aide, where she took on responsibilities such as dressing and undressing patients, emptying bedpans, giving enemas, bathing, and turning patients to prevent bed sores. So literally everything the nurses didn't want to do.
What certified nursing assistants did do.
Yeah. CNAs weren't really huge in the 80s. Not as big as they are now. So despite the challenging and sometimes hostile work environment, Vickie showed exceptional kindness and pride in her duties. We're in Texas. Vickie wasn't like all the other girls who were there just to get a paycheck, said a nurse who worked with her during those years. She was always kind to the patients. You could tell she took pride in what she was doing.
Bless her heart.
Bless your heart. Vickie herself expressed a long-standing ambition to become a nurse, inspired by her great-grandmother's death when she was a child. Ever since I watched my great-grandmother die when I was a little girl, I thought, I want to devote my life to helping people. I read a library book on Florence Nightingale and I said, that's who I want to be. While one might wonder if Vickie's statement was meant to cast her in a more favorable light, investigators confirmed that she was indeed a model teenager. She did not break any laws or exhibit any disturbing behavior. Instead, she was described as a classic wallflower, modest, unassuming, and often dressed in secondhand clothes. To be honest with you, she was just one of those girls you didn't really notice when you walked down the hallway, said Dickie Williams, whose father was one of Vickie's victims. Now, this is really significant because there's a reason Vickie Dawn Jackson is studied so much, she has so much stuff about her, is because typically with serial killers, which she is a serial killer, you have what we call the Holy Trinity. We've talked about it before, especially in adolescence. It is fire, setting fires. It is wetting the bed past the normal amount, and then also abuse to animals. Those are the Holy Trinity. That's usually at least two of them, if not all three, are seen in pretty much any serial killer. But Vickie Dawn Jackson, we did not see any of that.
Yeah, I mean, up until her teenage years, she had a pretty typical childhood as far as anyone could tell, and as far as she's admitted. So this one is, this is one for the books.
Despite her low profile, Vickie did try to fit in with her peers. Occasionally, on weekend nights, She would come home from work, change into jeans and a tube top, and head to the car wash next to the Dairy Queen. Keep that in mind, because that Dairy Queen has a significant point in this story, where the high school kids gathered. I remember she'd sort of stand there for a while, recalled Nicole Atterbury, another relative of one of Vickie's victims. But I don't really remember her getting into someone's car and cruising the drag like everyone else did. Maybe no one asked her. I just don't know. During her junior year, Vickie Dawn Jackson had an encounter that would briefly alter the course of her young life. One afternoon, while playing Miss Pac-Man at a local game room, she was approached by a construction worker named Johnny McLaughlin. He complimented her, calling her cute, and the lonely Vickie was quickly smitten. Within weeks, she convinced her parents that she was in love, and she and Johnny, who was 5 years older, were married by a justice of the peace. However, the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce within a year, a development that surprised no one. When asked about Johnny, Vickie appeared slightly embarrassed and downplayed the significance of the relationship. Oh, it was just a teenage thing. I guess I married him because he was one of the first boys who paid attention to me. But then he told me he was still on the rebound from another girl he loved. After her brief marriage to Johnny McLaughlin ended, Vickie Dawn Jackson moved back to her parents' home. She graduated from high school in May 1984 and started working full-time at the nursing home, aiming to save enough money to enroll in a nearby junior college to become a licensed vocational nurse, or LVN. However, within 6 months, she became pregnant. Leroy Carson, a young mechanic like her father, had shown her some attention. Leroy told me he loved me, she recalled, summarizing their early days together, and I believed him. They married in May 1985 and moved into a house right across the street from her parents. After the birth of their son Curtis, Vickie quickly became pregnant again and gave birth to their daughter Jennifer in 1986. A year later, she began attending nursing school part-time, leading a hectic life of raising 2 kids, cooking meals, cleaning the house, going to college, and working the night shift at the nursing home. Her challenges intensified when her parents moved back to Indiana to care for her dying grandfather, leaving Vickie without their support. Vickie was burning the candle at both ends, said Nancy Burnett, whose father would later become one of Vickie's victims. She was working so hard she wasn't getting any sleep. A lot of us told Vickie that she needed to slow down, but she wouldn't listen. She kept saying she could get everything done. In 1989, Vickie became an LVN, and the Nocona Nursing Home's administrators promoted her to night shift nurse. Devoted to her job, she sometimes took her children to the nursing home to give the residents get-well Crayola drawings they made at home. She often read articles from True Story, a romance magazine, to her female patients, sharing tales of women meeting the men of their dreams and living in houses with white picket fences. Now, you may ask, well, this sounds like the perfect woman. Why would we be talking about her on this podcast? Well, because things are about to take a turn for the worse.
Oh yeah, we're going south. This is going to go probably as bad as it can get, really.
At home, Vickie tried to create a marriage resembling the idealized stories she read. One day, she had her hair styled at Country Cuts, that's country with a K, a well-regarded beauty salon, and then drove 48 miles to Wichita Falls to have her picture taken at Glamour Shots. For the photo shoot, she wore a gold lame jacket, large earrings covered with imitation gemstones, presenting the photo to Leroy a few days later. However, Leroy was unimpressed. Now, this is the quintessential 1980s picture. You're seeing big hair, nails done, all of that stuff. She has the gold lame jacket that probably has those shoulder pads put in it, huge big earrings, and so you Google the 1980s and it's about every picture that's there. In 1994, He moved out and the couple divorced 2 years later. According to Vickie, Leroy told her he never would have married her if she hadn't gotten pregnant. He told me that I'd become a stupid, boring nurse and that no one cared about me, Vickie said, her face reflecting a distant look.
Yeah, just if you all haven't figured out, Vickie does not have the best luck with men. She keeps finding every asshole in pretty much the Tri-County area. It's pretty bad. Like, good Lord. I used to think I had bad luck dating before I met Pam.
It's a nice little save there.
Yeah, very nice save.
Determined not to give up on her dream of a happy marriage and a house with a picket fence, Vickie began walking around the block carrying dumbbells to lose weight so that men wouldn't say she was going to fat. On weekend nights, she got a babysitter and went to the Third Spur, a country music dance hall near Nocona, with a friend who was also a single mother. She wore jeans, boots, and what she described as short Western tops, and sat at a table near the bar drinking pina coladas. Despite her efforts, she made little impression on the patrons. "I'm sorry, I don't remember seeing her," said Lisa Pelkey, one of the more popular women at the Third Spur at the time. Pelkey, known for wearing a tight black dress with a front zipper, didn't recall Vickie, even when Vickie later came into her hospital room to inject her with mevacurium chloride. "No, I'm sorry," Pelkey said, bursting into tears. "She didn't." Now, in May 1997, after spending an entire evening at the Third Spur without talking to anyone, Vickie decided to take matters into her own hands. She resolved to ask the next man who walked through the door to dance. That man was Kirk Jackson. At 31 years old, Kirk was 5'3" tall, a little round, and slightly balding. They sat together, got tipsy, Kirk with beer, Vickie with more pina coladas, and when Vickie discovered that Kirk worked as an aide at a nursing home in nearby St. Joe, she dreamily said, "This must be fate." They danced to a slow Garth Brooks song with Kirk's hand sliding down to squeeze Vickie's bottom. Love at first height.
I'm 5'2", so I constantly get the fucking short joke.
Well, sometimes they go over her head, but
You asshole. Fuck you too.
2 months after their first meeting, on July 4th, they held their wedding ceremony at a public park by Lake Nocona. Vickie redecorated her home, buying a new waterbed so Kirk wouldn't have to sleep on the same bed Leroy had. She purchased matching recliners for the television room and a Chihuahua puppy, humorously named Killer because of its small size. Keep Killer in mind. When Kirk was hired by Nocona General Hospital to work the night shift as a nurse's aide, Vickie also secured a night shift LVN position there, allowing them to spend more time together. Folks, don't work with your spouse. You need a break.
No.
She began taking courses at a community college, telling her children that her goal was to become a registered nurse to take on more responsibilities at the hospital, earn a higher salary, and eventually buy a nicer house. Jennifer, her daughter, now 20, recalls her mother's hopeful spirit during this period. "I wish you could have seen her back then," Jennifer said when we met at the Dairy Queen. Told you, it's significant.
Mm-hmm.
She was still so full of optimism. She really believed her life was going to work out. Every day she'd put on her nurse's uniform, do her hair and makeup, and turn to me and Curtis using phrases from her self-help books. She'd say, "This day is going to be a good day, I promise. We're all going to have a good day." They did indeed not have a good day.
The freaking, what is it, that 48 hours, guys? Like, indeed, they didn't have a good day. Or was that the Unsolved Mysteries guy?
This is the moment they realized she fucked up.
That's a little later.
It wasn't long before Vickie's optimism gave way to strife. Kirk, who had never been married, frequently invited his friends over to drink and play cards on his night off. This disrupted the household and added tension to their marriage. I said, "Kirk, for the sake of the family, you gotta stop it. The kids can't sleep," Vickie recalled. "I tried to talk to him about his alcohol use and his role as a husband, and he got mad and called me a bitch. He said, 'Oh no, you're not going to control my life.'" Kirk's mother, Angela, who worked as a clerk at the hospital's nurses station, noticed Vickie's distress. "You could tell she was worried that he was going to leave her," Angela said. "She didn't like the way he flirted with the prettier nurses. Sometimes she'd stand by herself at the end of the hall trying not to cry. She'd say to me, 'I can tell Kirk doesn't love me. I can tell.'" By late 1999, the escalating tension between Vickie and Kirk became unbearable for Curtis, who moved in with his father, Curtis being the oldest child. He moved in with his father, Leroy. Jennifer followed suit a few months later. During this period, Vickie sought help from a counselor at a public mental health center in Bowie. Horrible counselor. Wearing her nurse's uniform to avoid being late for work, Vickie confided in the counselor about her deep depression, feelings of rejection, and mood swings. The counselor noted her tearfulness, alternating with episodes of irritability and rage, and her inability to recall activities she enjoyed. The counselor, seemingly unalarmed by Vickie's situation, recommended the book, Adultery, the Forgivable Sin, after Vickie expressed concerns about Kirk's fidelity.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jennifer, the daughter, then 14, noticed troubling changes in her mother. When I'd see her on the weekends, she would be sitting on the little steps outside our front door staring at nothing, or she'd just stand in the kitchen stove stirring things in a pot, her mind a million miles away. One day when she was standing at the stove, she suddenly turned around and kicked Killer the Chihuahua, which she had never done before.
Bitch. Being mean to the poor little puppy dog.
Even though you don't like chihuahuas.
I love all animals. And
I do not love chihuahuas.
First of all, I've never really encountered a chihuahua, so I can't say I don't love them. And second of all, they're cute, adorable, and little handheld and little small size, so I love them. I love all animals.
They're the most aggressive dogs on the planet. They're horrible. I hate chihuahuas. I would kick Killer.
How dare you?
Yes, how dare you? We're getting a chihuahua.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. During a weekend visit, Vickie revealed to Jennifer that she might be bipolar. I asked Mom what that meant, and she said, "It means I could kill you and get away with it." Jennifer, a slim young woman with short dark hair, pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I don't think she was talking directly about killing me. She was my mom, but still, I felt something, you know what I mean? I felt like something was crumbling inside her. The next time I went over there for the weekend, I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. Donnie Jennings. Donnie Jennings was known as an imperious, demanding woman who was quick to express her displeasure when she felt neglected. She complained a lot, and she'd spit on you and strike you with her hand if she didn't get what she wanted, Vickie said about Jennings, whom she had met a decade earlier at the Nakona nursing home. Now, we're going to kind of take a break from Donnie Jennings. I want to kind of go over what mivacurium chloride is. So, mivacurium chloride is used by doctors to temporarily paralyze a patient's respiratory system to facilitate the insertion of an oxygen tube into the trachea. Once the oxygen starts flowing, the effects of the drug quickly wear off. However, if administered in a high enough dosage without accompanying oxygen, the drug can be lethal. And keep in mind, this is artificial oxygen. So oxygen has to be pumped into it. You can't just breathe. So Vickie used ports in Jennings' IV to inject the mivacurium chloride. The drug flowed through the tube into Jennings' arm, and within seconds, she struggled to breathe. Soon, she turned blue and foamed at the mouth. Jennings tried to cry out for help, but her paralyzed lungs couldn't draw in any oxygen. She could only make a faint gasping noise before suffocating to death. A nurse's aide found Jennings at 1:45 a.m. Although it seemed odd that she would simply stop breathing, her vital signs had been normal at midnight. Her death wasn't considered remarkable due to her age. Vickie, standing by the nurse's station, offered to call Jennings' family with the news. "But I saw her earlier that night. Mama smiled at me," said Javine Foster, one of Jennings' daughters, when Vickie called. "Oh, Javine, life can be so hard sometimes," Vickie replied. Her voice was as buttery as a biscuit. "I personally know so well how hard it can be. Javine, I cannot tell you how sorry I am for your loss." It's possible that Vickie had no grand plan to murder her patients. Perhaps she didn't completely lose her mind, but simply lost her temper. In a moment of anger, she decided to silence the demanding widow Jennings, intending it to be a one-time act. But after Jennings' body was wheeled away, Vickie might have felt an unexpected rush. She knew what she had done was wrong, but the act brought a sense of exhilaration. After years of performing acts of mercy, committing an act of vengeance felt overpowering. Now, we're going to start getting into more of the deaths. So, all of the deaths are the same, so I'm not going to say, oh, this is where it gets violent and graphic. It doesn't really. She injected them. They all died. It is what it is, but there's a lot of them. In the early hours of December 20th, Vickie walked into the room of 87-year-old L.G. Hudson, admitted for a broken leg, and injected him with mivacurium chloride. Less than 20 minutes later, she injected the same drug into 62-year-old Sanford Mitchell, a retired supervisor admitted for cirrhosis. She then returned to Hudson's room, where nurses were frantically trying to save him, and nonchalantly suggested, "Y'all, someone needs to check on Mr. Mitchell. He's slumped over." Yeah. On Christmas Eve, she targeted 50-year-old Barbara Atterbury. Remember, we talked about the daughter earlier. Barbara was admitted for back pain, and later that day ended the life of 87-year-old Boyd Burnett, who was hospitalized due to disorientation. 5 days later, on December 29th, she killed 80-year-old James Gore, admitted for food aspiration, and 7 hours later ended 79-year-old Gertie Matthews' life, who was hospitalized for dementia and a UTI. As nurses attempted to revive Gore and Matthews, Vickie stood quietly in the back of each room, observing. In December alone, 7 patients at Nakona General died after going into respiratory arrest, despite having no history of serious respiratory issues. 2 patients even stopped breathing within minutes of each other. An unheard of event even in larger hospitals. How could the doctors not suspect something bizarre was happening? Dr. Chance Dingler, one of the physicians at the hospital, later stated a civil disposition that he assumed the hospital was just having a run of bad luck. It's called Dingler luck. Similarly, the hospital's CEO, Charles Norris, stated in another deposition that he didn't believe anything abnormal was happening because the patients were elderly and older patients tended to die more frequently in winter.
Which is true. They do die. They do tend to die more around that time frame. Plus,
but it's more from the flu or like cold, not an actual like stop breathing, foaming at the mouth.
Oh, I agree. I mean, this is, just doctors, man. I mean, what do they know, right?
Nurses know a lot more than the doctors. You can ask any registered nurse, LPN. They half the time know more than a doctor does.
Oh, I'm sure, because they're actually there more times than the doctor is.
Yeah, so Dr. Dingler, I mean, he just...
That's never going to not be funny.
So it's that.
Dr. Dingler.
Who is a family practitioner.
Paging Dr. Dingler. Paging Dr. Dingler. You are needed.
In oncology.
No,
gynecology.
Gynecology.
Yeah, that's right.
Incredibly, even when 5 more patients died after going into respiratory arrest during the first 8 days of January, the doctors and administrators didn't become suspicious. The administration was so pleased with the hospital's performance that it approved a nearly full-page advertisement in the Nakona News featuring all the nurses and nurses' aides. The ad began with "Nurses are some of the many stars who offer quality, compassionate care at Nakona General Hospital." And who was placed at the very top of the ad? It was Nurse Vickie, smiling pleasantly, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat knot. By mid-January, Vickie Dawn Jackson was becoming increasingly bold. One night, she injected mivacurium chloride into Jimmy Ray Holder while his wife sat beside him. She then targeted 95-year-old Oma Weiler, injecting her twice. The first time, other nurses found Weiler still breathing and managed to resuscitate her. 4 days later, Vickie slipped back into Weiler's room and injected her again, this time fatally.
The size of Vickie's balls.
Yep. While the doctors might not have been perplexed by the deaths, people in town certainly were. Tracy Mesler, the editor of Nakona News, told his wife, Linda, who sold all the ads, that he had never had to run so many obituaries. He was up to 5 or 6 a week instead of the usual 3 or 4. The owner of a floral shop mentioned to a friend that she was nearly breaking records selling arrangements to mourners, and the directors of the town's 2 funeral homes were having such a profitable year that they discussed buying new hearses. Now, Vickie Dawn Jackson did so good for Nakona's economy that they were just like, keep killing, please. However, remember, we talked about remembering the Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen was the only business suffering from all the deaths. It always sent paper plates and cups to the homes of the deceased for post-funeral receptions. I began thinking, if this dying doesn't slow down, we're liable to run out of paper products, said Sandra DeMoss, the Dairy Queen's manager at the time, who sounds like a huge man, apparently. But yeah, so Dairy Queen was not too happy with Vickie Dawn Jackson. Little do they know she kept eating there over and over. So a few nurses at the hospital were puzzled by the deaths. Some jokingly, albeit uneasily, referred to the night shift as the killing crew. One nurse found it odd that Vickie was often the last staffer seen by patients before they died.
You think?
Another noted that instead of calling from the room, Vickie would casually walk to the nurse's station to announce a patient was having trouble breathing.
I'm sorry, this should be the stupid crew.
Donna McIvor, an RN on the night shift, noticed that whenever patients were rude or unruly, Vickie, her eyes looking glazed over as if in a fog, would be the first to head toward the room saying, "I'll take care of it," or "I'll fix it."
Followed 2 minutes later, code blue, code blue.
Well, no, it would probably be more like 3 to 4, depending on how far the room was, because if this happened right in front of the nurse's station, nurses would have noticed.
More or less was happening right in front of them.
No. It was, but she would probably choose rooms that were further down the hallways, not in direct view of the nurse's station.
Probably, without actually seeing the actual hospital. And I doubt Nakona General is going to let us in there to go see it. Or unless we make a patient with Dr. Dingler.
Can I call to request a meeting with Dr. Dingler? I have a problem with my dingleberries.
Practice, actually. He's still practicing.
and Dairy Queen exists. And as we'll see later, it has tacos. Okay. Speaking of Dr. Dingler, the taco doctor. All right. So perhaps if the nurses had known more about Vickie's relationships with some of the patients, they might have connected the dots. Barbara Atterbury and Boyd Burnett had family members who used to make fun of Vickie in high school. Sanford Mitchell would stare at her breasts and call her nurse tits. L.G. Hudson's son, an EMT at Nakona General, would preach to Vickie about being born again to solve her problems. Kill him too. So, on January 11th, 3 hours after a nurse found pneumonia patient J.T. Nichols dead, another nurse discovered the body of John Williams, a retired rancher and oilman. Vickie was waiting by the hospital's front door for Williams' family. When Pat, Williams' son, arrived, Vickie walked up to him and said, "Pat, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know how you must feel." She then told me she had taken Dad outside earlier that evening to smoke a cigarette and that Dad had said he had lived a good life and was ready to go, Pat recalled. I thought, Dad wasn't even that sick. Why would he have said that? Then she took me and my brothers into the room to see Dad. I'll never forget the scene. Vickie hadn't fixed him up at all. His cheeks and his eyes were sunk in, and his mouth was open like he had been screaming. He looked like a ghoul in a horror movie.
Good Lord.
Despite these oddities, none of the nurses could believe Vickie was involved in the deaths. Why would they? Vickie was seen as gentle and caring. Throughout 2000, the hospital had not received a single complaint about her because she killed all of them. But on January 30th, everything changed. That night, Vickie injected mivacurium chloride into the IV of 82-year-old Orville Moore, who had called her a fat ass days earlier. Minutes later, she entered the room of 14-year-old Lydia Weatherreed, hospitalized for appendicitis. Lydia knew Vickie's children and had recently turned down Curtis, her son, for a date. "Hello, Lydia," Vickie said as she injected mivacurium chloride into her IV, claiming it was a pain reliever. Lydia's mother screamed for help as Lydia's chest began to hurt and she struggled to breathe. A doctor revived her just in time. The next day, Vickie targeted 2 more patients. Right before the 7 a.m. shift change, she injected mivacurium chloride into 46-year-old Donna Kernut, who managed to call for help before losing consciousness. Simultaneously, 35-year-old Lisa Pelkey, frequent visitor to the third spur, who did not remember her, went into respiratory arrest. The doctor and nurses revived Pelkey in time, but Kernut never regained consciousness and died weeks later. The hospital was in turmoil. 4 respiratory arrests in 2 days were unprecedented. A technician from the pharmacy informed Chief of Staff Len Dingler that vials of mivacurium chloride were missing from a crash cart. This revelation set the stage for uncovering Vickie's dark actions.
Gasp, shock.
After reviewing their records, the hospital's administrators discovered that Vickie Dawn Jackson was on duty during every respiratory arrest and often the last staffer seen checking on the patients who had died. While they deliberated on what action to take, lacking legal grounds to fire her, they made a critical error. They failed to place her under surveillance. This oversight gave Vickie a chance to exact revenge on her husband. Her husband, Kirk, his grandfather, E. Preacher Jackson, a 91-year-old former cotton farmer, was admitted to the hospital with a high fever and cellulitis. On February 4th, Vickie approached the nurse's station and quietly announced that she believed Preacher Jackson was dead. She then informed Kirk, who went outside and wept. Killed her own father-in-law.
Wow.
Oh, I feel that sometimes.
Grandfather-in-law.
I feel that sometimes. 2 days later, Chuck Norris, I mean, his name is Chuck Norris. The hospital's CEO and badass met with Police Chief Kent Holcomb to discuss the deaths. Holcomb contacted the Texas Rangers and the FBI. Realizing they lacked physical evidence to prove Vickie was murdering patients, they set up a hidden camera aimed at the mivacurium chloride supply, hoping to catch her stealing vials. To maintain secrecy, the hospital's administrators and doctors were asked not to disclose the investigation. Life at the hospital continued as usual. In mid-February, the night shift staff even threw a birthday party for Vickie and her mother-in-law, Angela. They had a potluck supper and cake, and Vickie and Angela received candles and body lotions and teddy bears. Vickie, holding her teddy bear, expressed her gratitude to the other nurses, saying, thank y'all. Y'all don't know what this means to me."
I won't kill you tomorrow.
A few days after the birthday party, however, 61-year-old Donnelly Reed, one of Nakona's best-known residents, was admitted to the hospital for post-polio syndrome. After receiving medication, he felt better and prepared to return home. However, in the early hours of February 17th, Vickie appeared at the nurse's station and said, "You better go check on Mr. Reed. He is making a snorting horse-like sound." A doctor and other nurses managed to resuscitate Reed. When they asked what had happened, he said a blonde-haired nurse had entered his room and injected something into his IV. She then smiled and asked, "Can I do anything else for you?" Before she left the room, Reed said, "I felt like a spring was uncoiling in my head. I couldn't breathe." The incident provided a crucial witness account. Although law enforcement agencies still lacked direct physical evidence, Reed's testimony about Vickie's suspicious behavior and the hidden camera's ongoing surveillance offered hope that they could soon gather enough proof to stop her. 2 days after the attack on Donnelly Reed, law enforcement officers discovered a syringe and a garbage can at Vickie and Kirk Jackson's home. Y'all, as soon as that trash hits the outside, it's on public property, anybody can go through it. So if you're gonna dispose of a murder weapon, probably don't put it out there. Tests later proved that it contained traces of mivacurium chloride. When interviewed, Kurt claimed to have no clue how the syringe had gotten there. Vickie, with an earnest expression, echoed his statement, insisting she was shocked that patients had been murdered. She suggested that several staffers might be responsible, but refrained from naming anyone. The following day, the hospital's administrators fired both Vickie and Kirk. Although no one believed Kirk was involved in the killings, as a nurse's aide, he wasn't allowed to handle medication and wasn't working during some of the murders. CEO Charles Norris deemed his termination in the best interest of the hospital. Soon, the news of Vickie's investigation spread through the town, creating a buzz at the Dairy Queen. "You could have knocked us over with a feather," said Tom Hancock, a regular at Dairy Queen and a retired rodeo cowboy. "A lot of people said she must have snapped just like those women on TV who go from normal to crazy without any warning, but I had trouble believing it. I told everyone, hold on, partners, the killer might still be out there."
He's eating his little ice cream cone in his cowboy rodeo outfit.
Despite the suspicion, Vickie didn't go into hiding. She continued to live in her house on Henrietta Street and frequented the Dairy Queen for her taco basket. Smiling at stunned diners, she maintained her innocence. One afternoon, Vickie ran into Pat Williams, whom she had last seen the night she killed his father. "How are you, Pat?" she asked congenially. "It's so good to see you." Williams was speechless. If a man suspected of murder, my daddy had come up and said hello, I'd have thrown him right through a plate glass window. But it was Vickie, looking all proper. I went to my truck and called my wife, saying, "Honey, good Lord Almighty," Vickie said, "hello, what do I do?"
I mean, that's pretty ballsy right there.
Yeah.
No one seemed more confused by the turn of events than Kirk. Though he admitted Vickie was unhappy with their marriage, he couldn't fathom her being so unhappy she'd kill people. A marriage can't make a woman that crazy, can it?
For all the women and men that are married out there, yes, it can.
There's a reason I'm divorced.
Somebody help me.
Eventually, Kirk packed up and left town, plagued by nightmares of Vickie stabbing him with a needle. Ben feels that one. There's a reason Pam does it in our D&D sessions. And with that being said, check out our new campaign every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Brand new campaign. It's awesome. So, after Kirk's departure, Vickie returned to the third spur with a friend, wearing one of her short western tops. This time, some cowboys asked her to dance. Whether it was because Lisa Pelkey, the attractive regular, was no longer there, thanks to her, or they wanted to boast about dancing with a serial killer, Vickie didn't seem to care. She smiled and smiled that night, said her friend. She really acted like she didn't have a care in the world. Before they could arrest Vickie Dawn Jackson for murder, police investigators needed to prove that patients had been killed. This required a court order to exhume the bodies of those who had suffered respiratory arrests and perform autopsies to determine if mivacurium chloride was present. The exhumations did not begin until June 2001. By then, many families had hired lawyers to sue the hospital and its doctors for negligence. Harry Don Reed, son of Donnelly Reed, was one such plaintiff. He lived across the street from Chance Dingler and nearly got into a fist fight with him, shouting, "You let that crazy nurse run around your hospital and didn't do a thing to stop her, you damn Dingler."
What if they had got into a fist fight outside the Dairy Queen?
Dairy Queen Dingler incident. Don and Dingler at the Dairy Queen. Lydia Weatherreed, the teenage girl hospitalized with appendicitis, also sued and wrote a paper for her high school English class about her near-death experience. She later considered nursing school, saying, "After what I've been through, I decided we could use some better nurses." As months passed, Vickie continued to act as if she had done nothing wrong. She even secured a job as an LVN at a nursing home in Gainesville, just east of Nocona. She told the administrators, who did not check her references, that she loved working with older patients. However, she was fired within a few weeks after administrators suspected her of attempting to steal medication. They don't reveal the medication, but I'm going to say, just a wild guess, it's mivacurium chloride.
Yeah.
That's just a wild guess. I'm probably right. Finally, in July 2002, Vickie was arrested at a grocery store in Bowie, where she had gotten a job in the deli department. The deli manager, shocked, told a local newspaper, "They have gotten the wrong person. She was a delightful and loved telling funny stories." And then killing people. Their arrest drew significant media attention. Reporters flocked to Nocona, hoping to get Vickie to talk, but she refused all interview requests at this time. In the Montague County Jail, she spent her time reading issues of True Story and watching ER. She also read the Nocona news coverage of her case, where she regularly referred to as the Angel of Death, which this is the first time we ever hear Angel of Death. However, it will go on to be used significantly more. Vickie befriended a couple of female inmates, maintaining that she was a loving nurse who could never hurt anyone. However, according to an affidavit from one inmate, Vickie's lawyer sent her a package containing evidence for her trial, including autopsy photos of the exhumed bodies. When the inmate commented on how terrible it must be for the families, Vickie's demeanor changed. "Screw those families," she said. Now, number one, this is weird. I don't know why the lawyer sent her a package containing autopsy photos. Typically, that's not standard, especially for a serial killer. You should not let them see the photos because typically gets them going. So I don't know why he's sending this evidence for the trial. He should not be at all.
I get the feeling that she had a public defender and probably took the whole assist in her own defense a little too literally and probably actually thought that she could actually help in this. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of weird. I mean, she has the right to see it, but it is still, her lawyer should have been doing really all the legwork on this. I don't know what she...
Suspected serial killer, they would not have sent any of those pictures.
Not to Vickie herself, no, they would have sent it to the lawyer.
And the lawyer should have known not to send those pictures to a suspected serial killer. So I'm guessing it was a brand new lawyer.
Probably. And again, a public defender, unfortunately, most public defenders aren't always the best lawyers. They're just kind of there.
And that's on the jail, too. The jail should have, because they screen everything that comes in, they should have seen that and not given it to her, but whatever. Years passed as lawyers prepared for trial. Then, unexpectedly, Vickie pleaded no contest. When reporters asked her attorney, Bruce Martin, why she had done so, he explained that Vickie felt it was important that a jury never find her guilty of murder. She has never admitted guilt, and she was never convicted by a jury, Martin said. Those things meant something to her. This baffling statement sparked further debates back at the Dairy Queen. If Vickie adamantly refused to admit guilt, why would she plead no contest and accept a life sentence? Had she lost her mind? Was she so insane that she should be sent to a mental institution instead of a prison? In the end, the community of Nocona was left with more questions than answers. Vickie's actions and subsequent plea left a lasting impact on the town and on Dairy Queen, forever altering its perception of one of their own. The Angel of Death narrative haunted the residents, leading them to grapple with the thin line between sanity and madness, and the unsettling reality that sometimes the most gentle faces can hide the darkest secrets. So, thoughts, Vickie Dawn Jackson?
What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, I think she just had life just sucked for her, and she finally hit her boiling point or breaking point. That for her first victim was probably just pushed her one too many times. And she just decided, well, screw you, lady. And then, as they said, she just kind of saw her dying, gasping for air, and she liked the feeling. And she just kept doing it. And then once they just weren't stopping her, or they weren't figuring out that it was her, she just got bold and reckless, and she ended up just getting caught. But like Kayde said earlier, this is a weird one in the sense of serial killer. She is very most definitely a serial killer, but she almost all the boxes that should be checked for her don't. Other than just having a horribly bad taste in men, Vickie Jackson is actually pretty typical. Mom, nurse, one of the most common fields people go into.
Well, nursing is also very stressful. And she's already dealing with stress at home with her husband potentially cheating on her, her mother-in-law saying, well, just get over it, then her trying to reach out and get help from a therapist, and him giving her a book that says cheating's okay, you just need to forgive him, which makes sense for that time frame, for Texas, where, oh, you just need to make it work. You can't divorce because divorce is a sin.
Well, she was divorced. She had divorced, but in this case, I think she was just so determined to have that idolized family life that she read about that she was going to get it no matter what. But the strain of doing that just made her snap.
And obviously, they did talk about her possibly having bipolar disorder. That could have also caused her to snap, that she just went, the therapist even said she went from happy to crying to angry within minutes of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she's a freak. Vickie Dawn Jackson, if I remember right, she is currently trying to get out of jail.
Good luck with that.
Let's see.
I want to know is, does the top go at this Dairy Queen still offer the taco basket? Because that actually sounds really good. Not even gonna lie.
Yeah, from what I can tell, she is trying to get out. But I mean, it's not gonna happen. So, but yeah, that's Vickie Dawn Jackson. We are going to change up some stuff. We planned on doing Vlad the Impaler, but we did find a story that is a little more local to us about the vampire cult. So we will go ahead and we'll be doing that next week, and then go into some hauntings. So, because we haven't done hauntings in a while. So, but yeah. So we want to thank everybody for listening, and thank you for visiting the Scarlet Tavern. Please remember to turn in your glasses, push in your seat, and as always, tip the bard. Good night, everybody.
Good night.